because they're probably scared to show themselves as well.
Oh
Right.
yeah.
So if you can show up and be a little bit more vulnerable and hold that space and
Hmm.
allow them to come
Hmm.
in, and then they'll be able to hold that space for you after, kind of thing.
Mm,
Um,
right.
so yeah, essentially being what you want to attract in a sense, and
Yeah.
then finding.
I was just going to agree with you, Rachel. Yes,
Okay.
there's lots of ways online to find other people, like like you said, meetups and stuff. I don't think the problem is how do we find other people as much as it is what do we do once we found them, because
Yeah.
we have been nurtured through social media to pursue breadth of connection instead of depth of connection, and
Hello, thank you for tuning into the Natural Health Rising podcast. My name is Rachel Smith. I am a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and I've helped hundreds of people naturally reverse symptoms of autoimmune diseases and other health challenges, from digestive issues to hormone imbalances. And in these weekly episodes, you're going to learn from myself and top health experts from around the world about functional medicine and holistic health tips to help you rise to your healthiest, happiest self. On today's episode, I have Ryan Pink with me. Ryan has endured a variety of challenges, including cancer, over 25 concussions, PTSD, and a couple very relaxing minutes of being dead. He now podcasts, talks, and writes about how we heal from the hard things in our past and build resilience in our future. He started and runs Hope Guide, a company devoted to helping people find healing from trauma, grief, depression, and anxiety the smart way. Along with a team of experienced guides and practitioners, they take a holistic view to create personalized plans to each client to help them find their own healing and resilience as quickly as possible. He also hosts the How We Heal podcast and gives keynote speeches on healing and resilience. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Rachel, thanks for having me. It's so good to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm so curious as I was reading your bio, like, wow, some very challenging and interesting experiences, near-death experiences, PTSD, all of this stuff. We should talk offline. I've also, I'm like reading this, I'm like, oh, these are some interesting things I've gone through as well myself. So I'm so curious, how have you experienced, how these experiences have shaped your approach to trauma healing and resiliency?
Um, I mean, everything I do is based on those experiences. I don't actually come from this world. I kind of came into this kind of work kicking and screaming. I was in publishing for many, many years, and that was my passion. and but I feel like those experiences, particularly my experience with overcoming PTSD, which for me was a very circuitous and expensive path, kind of gave me this passion for helping other people to find healing from that. Without, in my case, I spent about $300,000 to heal from PTSD, and it gave me a passion for helping other people to do the same thing, but without that barrier in place, because that's what it took me. And for a lot of people, they're not able to heal without that high level of expense. So that's kind of what got me into this passion. And the rest of the experiences have just made my life more interesting, I think.
Are you open to sharing what that PTSD was and kind of how that
Yeah.
cultivated and what that $300,000 journey was like?
Oh, sure, sure. Yeah. Where do I begin? So I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2020, although I'd had it for, well, I should put a brief caveat here to say that I don't believe in the diagnosis of PTSD. There's so many of the diagnoses that we get in the mental health world, which I personally am of the view that they're unnecessary labels, and they're not helpful, and they're limiting in how they put us in boxes. Nonetheless, the diagnosis did give me some kind of context to understand what it is I was working through. But I'd had the experience of PTSD, which is how I talk about it, for my entire life, for as long as I can remember. And it stems from childhood neglect, abuse, stuff like that, for many years. And I, like so many of the people that I've worked with about 1,000 people now myself. And I'm resilient and adaptive, just like my the people that I work with are. And I've had 25 concussions, which leads me to sometimes forget the questions that I'm asked in interviews, and I forgot I forgot the rest of the questions. Sorry.
So the question was, you mentioned it took you $300,000 of this journey, which I'm just so curious, like, what are some of the things that you were doing and what were actually the needle movers for you that wound up propelling you to feeling like you finally overcame that?
Yeah. So I did pretty much everything that you could possibly imagine, anything that is out for trauma. Really what it had amounted to is I'd sold a few companies that I'd built with my wife, and I was suicidal all the time, like every single day. And I thought, well, at some point that wears on you to the point where you're like, well, maybe I should just do it. And I thought, well, I have a bunch of children and I need to figure out another solution. And so I was pretty desperate, and I tend to do things, I go all in on things. So I did every possible therapy you can imagine. At one point I was doing 18 different, they weren't all different, but 18 therapy sessions per week. And so in terms of modalities, I don't know that it matters, but I mean, EMDR, somatic experiencing, neurofeedback, internal family systems. I did lots of, I stayed at a clinic in Switzerland for several months. I did pretty much any modality you can mention. I probably tried at one point. Talk therapy, which was for me and for trauma typically not very useful, and it wasn't for me. I did that for quite some time, and I started this journey of healing before I was diagnosed with PTSD. I knew there was something wrong, and I had to start working through it. But I think the biggest thing for me was less about an individual therapy, Rachel, and more about the understanding that I didn't need somebody else to heal. And this is foundational to the work I do. And no offense if you or your other guests use this language, it's very common, but I sort of get a little uptight over the idea that the people like us who work in this profession are healers, because I don't think that I can heal you or that you can heal me. I know that the only person that can heal me is myself, and the only person that can heal you is yourself. The best we can be is guides for people, which is why we call the company Hope Guide. And so along the process, of course, I learned some therapies that were useful for me. EMDR was very helpful for some things. Somatic experiencing was very helpful for some things. I did a fair bit of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. I'm not sure if you talk about that on this podcast or not. But some of that was quite useful for me. But also some of the things that we don't think about when we think about mental health, like changing my diet, getting more exercise, getting more sun, believe it or not, stuff like that was really, really useful. Really optimizing my sleep so that I didn't have these sort of weak points towards depression, anxiety, and expression of PTSD. All of those things made quite a bit of difference. So yeah, feel free to ask more about that, but I think the one thing I will say is that what worked for me may not work for a lot of other people, because the way that and that's why we have the model we do at Hope Guide, which we can get into if it's appropriate. But we're really looking at how does trauma, depression, anxiety showing up for individual people, and what are the specific levers that are most useful for them to move that for them. And that can vary a lot depending on the specific causes for those people.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it's people are not healers. It is really more of you doing the work and changing things in yourself and your mindset and your lifestyle. And it can take time, and it can take trying a lot of different things sometimes.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we really are just here to provide the tools, the knowledge, and the information, and then the other person has to take it and really run with it to see those changes in themselves. So I have clients all the time sending me messages like, thank you so much, you're amazing, I love you, which is beautiful. But I'm like, yeah, but you're the one who did everything. You're the one in your house cooking the healthy food. You're the one getting up and going to the grocery store and getting in the sauna and getting the sunlight, and like, you're healing you right now. So really like pat yourself on the back for all of the hard work that you're doing, because it is hard work when you're first in a place where you're having depression, anxiety, you're struggling with things, to even be able to pull yourself out of that and start with small tasks is such an incredible thing for people to be able to do.
Oh, 100%. I agree, Rachel. And I think there's something really important, especially when it comes to trauma, about the sense that we have our own agency, that we are not dependent on somebody else to fix us or cure us or heal us. There's something really important about that, specifically with trauma, which I've worked a lot with. Trauma fundamentally is very often caused by a lack of agency, a lack of ability to make a change that keeps you safe in many cases. And so being able to recognize that you have the agency to move out of that is like a critical piece. So I'm glad that we share that view.
Mm-hmm. What was the aha moment that motivated you to start Hope Guide?
Well, in doing the trauma therapy, the trauma work, really, and I realized I had spent $300,000. And but when at the point when I no longer qualified for a PTSD diagnosis, that doesn't mean there wasn't more work to do. There still was, and I still go to therapy on a somewhat regular basis, and I do a lot of things to keep myself in a good place. But it was spending that $300,000, and I thought, well, I'm so glad I had the money to throw at that problem. But it came with a sinking feeling. I thought to myself, what about if I only had $250,000, where would I be today? And I probably would have been dead, if I'm completely honest, because I don't think I could have continued to hold on. And then I was like, well, what if I had 100,000 or 50,000 or 20 or 10, or like so many people, enough money for a few sessions of therapy? Where would I be then? And honestly, it brought me to tears. I mean, it really, really devastated me. This idea that we have this barrier to healing that I've since come to believe is artificial. But at the time, it's when people are struggling, they think I need to go to therapy and spend $150 or $200 a session. Don't get me wrong, therapy is wonderful when it's used properly. It can be really useful. But Hope Guide started based on this idea that I wanted to help to remove the barriers of entry to healing from trauma specifically, but depression, anxiety, all of the expressions, I consider to be expressions of trauma often. I wanted to be part of the solution. And then so I started looking into, is it possible? I started thinking, is it possible that there is another way to heal that doesn't involve us doing all of these sort of psychotherapeutic methods? And then I realized, well, gosh, that's only been around for like 150 years. Like, what did we do before then? Like, how did we heal from the hard things in our past before psychotherapy was invented? I thought, well, I think we've been healing for a long time, maybe even thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of years. So that kind of got me down the path of looking at, my podcast is called How We Heal. We investigate these topics all the time. And so I started to develop an interest in how can we understand the ways in which we heal so we can reduce that artificial barrier so people can find their own way to healing, so that regardless whether they have $300,000 to spend or they have nothing, they can start to move towards healing. And that's the passion that keeps me going every day. And it was that moment a few years ago that prompted my journey into this work.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, most people don't have $300,000 to put towards this stuff. And what's really crazy is the fact that now people are more anxious, depressed, and lonelier than ever before. And I was just talking about this today with a couple of my clients, sharing this story because I was kind of talking about social media. And the story is that a couple of my clients recently, within the past few months, two totally different women, at almost the exact same time, both of their sons tried killing themselves in the past few months. And it's just like such a heartbreaking thing and so wild
Yeah.
that just in my population of clients, I was seeing this thing happen side by side. And it is all of these things you're talking about, right? The food, the lack of sunlight, all of that. But then also what I'm thinking is like the lack of connection, social media. It's really changing the way that our brains are working and our connection to people. So I would love to hear more of your thoughts on why our society is trending in this direction.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's so much I can say on that topic, but I would say that it's possible, given enough time and generations passing, that we would adapt to these kind of changes that we've had in our society. But we've had rapid change over the last 100 years, 150 years, like rapid change. And so a lot of the things that we had adapted to, we just haven't yet caught up to. So maybe if we have social media for the next 200 years, 300, 400, 500, whatever, 1,000 years, however long it takes, we could adapt and it would be like a source of joy for us. I don't know. I hope it doesn't last that long, personally. But let's just looking at where we are right now. We have disconnected ourselves from the ways that we actually heal. So we have these 4 different areas that we've identified, and it's not unique to us. It's just the way we talk about it. We call it the 4 core, and these are the areas that, prior to even doing any psychotherapy, if we can support these 4 areas, most depression, anxiety, loneliness, trauma, that stuff will start to just move away on its own. So that's why we like to educate on those. And the 4 core are eat, move, sleep, and connect. Eat is like, what are we putting in our bodies? And that includes supplementation, but like we're putting all sorts of, I probably can't swear in this podcast. We'll say crap.
You can if you want.
We put all sorts of crap in our bodies that our bodies are just not adapted to, new chemicals, things that our bodies have never known, and our bodies don't know what to do with it. So it clogs us up and we all start to have all sorts of issues. If we learn to like go back to eating really good, healthy food, that can make a massive difference. Of course, we have to deal with the effects of having poor quality food. And sometimes that can be difficult to address, but that's why we have people like you to help guide us into that process. So eat is one. Move, this is like prior to the computer age. We used to do things with our bodies most of the time, and we didn't realize that sitting in front of a computer screen means that we don't have this natural ability to release stress in our bodies through movement. So that stress stores up over time and contributes to, some people would say dysfunction. I would say adaptation, but uncomfortable experiences. And so we've got eat, move, we've got sleep, which is like, we have all sorts of interruptions to our sleep we never used to have before, particularly in the forms of artificial light. And also there's the toxins we put in our food that can affect our sleep. But if you're not sleeping well, try having a good attitude. For example, try feeling okay with your life if you miss a night of sleep, or if you only get, 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night for a week. Things start to look pretty dim pretty quickly. And we know there's a lot of studies on this stuff that show, and I can get into those if you'd like, but that show that that poor sleep is one of the worst offenses for our lives. The one I care the most about, though, is connect. And this is to your point on social media. Okay, so I have a speech I give called "Sometimes All We Need Is a Witness." And Rachel, when I wrote that speech, I didn't know how true that was. I mean, I knew it was true-ish. I mean, I believed it, but I didn't believe how much power it comes from just showing up for other people with intentional presence. I mean, can I give you a little anecdote of an experience I had recently?
Go for it.
I've had lots of experiences like this, but this one really hit home for me. So I was sitting with a client and having a conversation, and I have over time learned how to listen very intently and listen with my eyes, my ears, and actually with my nervous system. And there's something about sort of creating space for somebody in all of those ways that really allows them to be fully expressed, or a lot more fully expressed. And I was meeting with this client, and she was explaining a number of symptoms, and one of these symptoms that she had had for 15 years. and it was something in her body that was bothering her. I believed it to be an effect of trauma, and we were talking about some of the potential solutions. So we had a long conversation, a couple of hours, and about 2 weeks later, we had a follow-up conversation, which was just to talk about the plan that I was helping to put together for her. And I asked her about this particular symptom. She said, Ryan, it's really strange that you should bring that up because I've experienced that for 15 years. She said, but when we had that conversation, it was the first time I had ever in my life, and I've done lots of therapy, it was the first time I ever felt like I was able to just share everything openly without judgment. And she said, after that call, that thing that I've been dealing with for 15 years just disappeared. And I haven't experienced it since. And I just had a follow-up with her a couple of days ago. And still, that symptom has not come back again. And before it sounds like I'm trying to take credit, I don't think it has anything to do with me. I think this is the power of being a witness. When we sort of make that energetic space for someone to say, you know what, you get to be fully expressed. There's no judgment, only curiosity. Our bodies just tend to say, oh, I can actually release this. I can get it out. And then it doesn't need it anymore. It's because it's often we view it as a disease or something like that. But in fact, it's actually just a signal that's waiting for something to be witnessed, to be seen, to be heard, to be felt. And once that happens, spontaneous healing happens. And she tried to thank me for it. And I very quickly corrected her. I said, girl, it has nothing to do with me. Nothing at all to do with me. That was all you. So thank yourself. And I'm glad that I got to be a witness for you. That was a beautiful experience for me too. And so back to the topic of social media. Social media has given us the illusion of connection without actually giving us real connection. We don't have the experience of being able to be witnessed by other people fully, and to sit as a witness for other people fully. And so we end up having 3 to 4 times the amount of stable connections that we can have, personal human connections that we can have and that we can maintain stably. And so we end up thinking we're connecting, but we're actually not. We're disconnecting. So we don't have the ability to be seen, heard, and expressed. And I believe that number is 61%, by the way, of people in North America that say that they have depression, anxiety, or are lonely. That's a really big number. And that's not even looking at all sorts of other diagnoses. I believe that if we actually were to sit with each other as a witness and learn this skill that we used to have, because we used to do it around campfires and in churches and in all these words where we were there for each other without distraction, I believe that number would go way down with just that one thing alone. And it's a skill that we are innately wired to do. We just need to remember how to do it.
Yeah. I've been feeling called lately to do more in-person retreats because of this. I hosted my first retreat last year, and it was really, really powerful. And I've also experienced going to these events and things as well. And I'm really excited to bring that to people because I see the massive need there. And quick story myself, I was telling you before we started that I did this big trip and I was traveling for the last 9 months. I was traveling alone. So it was interesting. When I was younger, I didn't have necessarily the best community in my early 20s. And so I think I used to actually enjoy traveling more, almost like an escape, or I would want to go see the countries, but also I didn't really care if I left people behind because I didn't really have good connections. So I would go see these beautiful places, come back and feel recharged. I would enjoy it. And when I moved to Arizona in 2020, I wound up building the most beautiful group of people. I love them so deeply, have amazing friends, have a great community. And last year, for some reason, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go on this big trip and I'll come back next year. And within a month of my traveling, I was like, oh my God, I miss everybody. I miss people. I miss being able to hang out with the people who can see me deeply, not just these you get connections when you travel and it's great and it's fun, but it can only go so deep when you're moving to the next country in a month and the next country in a month and again. And so I came back and I remember I was like in tears when I was coming to meet my friends for the first time because it's just such this, um, we need it. We need this connection. And so it was so amazing and beautiful to come back and have that again. So I would love to hear some examples from you of how can people create this connection in their lives if they feel like they don't have it.
Oh, sure. Um, so I think the main thing is actually really, really simple. And it's something that I call being a witness for somebody, but it's based on a whole bunch of studies and research and therapeutic modalities. And but it's really, really simple, and we can do this with anybody. So this is there's three components. Number one is seeing people. And seeing people when you're having a conversation is not just about sort of like noticing that they're there, but it's being observant. And the easiest way, the easiest path into all three of these things, by the way, is just nurturing curiosity, being curious about that particular person. Because curiosity energetically gives them an invitation to be expressed. And so it's like a feedback loop. When you show up with curiosity and they can feel that, they give you more things to be curious about. And it becomes a very, very interesting, this can happen through conversation most of the time, although it doesn't even have to only be that. So the first thing is seeing somebody, and it's being aware of their body language. What are they doing with their hands? And at first it might seem like a lot to take in, but it's just like, what am I noticing? Really is what it comes down to. The second thing is hearing them. It's noticing their the way that they're talking, the tone of voice. It's not just hearing their words and waiting for the opportunity to speak, but what is it that they are communicating outside of their words? Because so much of what we're communicating is happening in our tone of voice. Of course, that's what we miss in social media, a lot of social media, right? And so those two are kind of like, everybody's pretty much familiar with that. Okay, I need to kind of like listen a little bit more and hear a little bit more. The thing that most people aren't aware of, though, is the idea of how do I feel when I'm around you? So this was actually a surprising thing that I learned from Daniel McQueen from Medicinal Mindfulness in Colorado. It was a really big aha moment, and he packaged it and talks about it differently. But he was talking about this kind of work of sitting, sort of a therapeutic modality that he teaches, and he said that it's a 75-25 when you're sitting with a client, that you're spending 75-25 in terms of where we're focusing our energy on the client and ourselves. And I thought that meant we focus 25% of the focus on the client and 25% on ourselves, which I thought was a little generous towards ourselves. And he was like, no, Ryan, it's the complete opposite. It's 75% on yourself and 25% on your client. And I was like, there is no way that this is correct, that it absolutely cannot be correct. Now, he teaches a particular modality which sort of makes a little bit more room for that. But what I learned from that experience, and the more that he taught, and then that took me down a path of studying some therapeutic modalities, is that we can learn a lot about somebody by how we're experiencing them. And everything that we learn about somebody, we are learning through the experience of our own bodies. So if we learn to be attentive to our own bodies, then we can actually learn a lot about somebody by what our body is communicating with us about them. And so the question that's the entry point into that, it's really, really easy, is how is this person making me feel right now? What do I feel when I'm around them? And I got to tell you, Rachel, I've had some wild experiences. I mean, really, really specific things that I can't explain. Like I would start to feel a pain under my ribs on the left-hand side. And I've learned to listen to that stuff. And I'd say, oh, are you actually at this particular... I've learned to do this. In the beginning, I didn't know there was any connection. But I would... This is weird and wild. But I started to say, what's happening under your rib cage on the left-hand side? And usually there's an answer, because I'm experiencing in my body. And now I can't explain to you exactly how that works. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it's happened enough times that I know my body is communicating to me a lot about what the people that I'm with are experiencing. And that gives me insight into them and gives me more opportunities for curiosity. So when you ask about how can we do this, it's actually just a matter of sitting down with somebody and say, hey, can we be really focused on each other? Can we put our distractions down and just spend an hour in a good conversation and just share with each other? And we have no judgment and we're just like being curious with each other. Like that's all it is. It's really just making space for each other to be seen. And then we can, of course, talk about things like our own nervous system and seeing and hearing. The truth is, once you start to do that with somebody else, they start to do that automatically without even thinking about it anyways. Over time, maybe not the first time, but a few times they start to learn because we're creating a template for other people to follow, just like they're creating a template for us to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
So yeah, so you're saying the 75% is actually feeling in your body, like focusing that energy on feeling, and then just kind of like trying to tune into their energetic body, basically.
Yes.
I actually have 2 specific girlfriends who are some of my best friends. One lives in Florida, one lives here in Arizona, and both of them are very in tune with me, where they will be like, Rachel, what was it one time? I think it was like my back was hurting or my knee was hurting or something. And she's like, gosh, what is wrong with your back right now? And I'm like, oh, you feel that? And so we're very connected to each other. And I've had another girlfriend, she's able to pretty much call me like if something's wrong with me. And she's like, hey, how you doing? What's going on? I'm like, actually, I'm going through a breakup right now, or whatever the situation is. She's like, yeah, I could tell. So I 100% believe in all of this stuff. I'm going to start trying it with my clients. I'm just going to be like, how's your knee doing right now?
Well, and the thing I got to tell you, Rachel, is, and this is going to sound like a complete contradiction, and since you gave me permission to swear, I don't believe in any of that shit. I really don't. Well, I mean, it's complicated. I'm not predisposed to believe in it, but I've experienced it enough times now that I'm like, listen, I don't really know. I mean, I know some sort of explanations that kind of maybe sort of cover it. I'm just not sure if they're actually really explaining what's going on. So even though I quote unquote don't believe in it, I'm kind of forced to admit that there's something going on there. And so, yeah, and it's not just like pain. It's also just like, how is this person making me feel? Like if you're around somebody and you start to feel anxious, that's really common. We're picking up on the signals from that person. Now, it could be that they're dangerous. It also could just mean that they're feeling a lot of anxiety. So if we notice that in ourselves, that shift, that change, that gives us some insight into what they're experiencing, and we can explore that with curiosity.
What about for people who don't feel like they actually have people they can do this with right now? How do they find those people?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the big challenges of our day and age, because we used to have communities. We used to have, in fact, and one of my speeches, I would talk a lot about this, but, we didn't used to have the mobility that we have, the ability to change communities if things weren't working out so great. It used to be like you were stuck with people, so you had to develop a relationship. So relationships have become somewhat commoditized. We haven't prioritized them or valued them very much. And so we go to social media to try and find a connection. We don't find it there because, it's not really to be found there. And so I would say there are some really old ways that we can do that. And they're not super common or popular, but we used to have things like churches and like religious communities. And I'm not even talking about the specifics of religion. I just mean those were places where we were able to foster ongoing connection. There's some of the things like find people who are doing things in your area that you enjoy doing, like, paddleboarding and stuff like that. That may or may not facilitate connection. I would also say that one of the reasons that therapy can be beneficial for people, and often is because they are getting that from somebody who's showing up with an attuned presence for them. I don't like that the barrier to connection is spending $150 an hour or whatever it costs. I think there are better ways to do that. But I would say probably the biggest thing is, if you want to have that for yourself, if you are finding opportunities to show up for other people like that, it'd be surprising how quickly we can develop connection, because people are really drawn to people who see them, who hear them, who feel them. And so it's just a matter of like, where do you find people, and where can I show up and do that for other people? If we're showing up just hoping that somebody does that for us, I mean, we all have our needs. But if you show up looking like, how can I be a witness for somebody else? Man, that's really powerful.
It also, yeah, it makes it if you can show up for, because they're probably scared to show themselves as well.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So if you can show up and be a little bit more vulnerable and hold that space and allow them to come in, and then they'll be able to hold that space for you after, kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah, essentially being what you want to attract, in a sense, and then finding some sort of meetup groups, whether that's religion related or sports related or something, and just getting out there and going at it and see what kind of connections you can create. And then of course you mentioned, go ahead.
I was just going to agree with you, Rachel. Yes, there's lots of ways online to find other people, like, you know, like you said, meetups and stuff. I don't think the problem is how do we find other people, as much as it is what do we do once we found them, because we have been nurtured through social media to pursue breadth of connection instead of depth of connection, and breadth of connection is not satisfying. It simply isn't. It's like empty calories for our soul. Depth of connection is what we really crave, to be truly seen and heard and felt. And so that really does come from learning to give that to other people. And, you know, like I said, there's tons of ways to find other people in your community. And it's just, you want to turn that into a quality connection, and that's how you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Hope Guide, you guys connect your clients with services that they need based on their budget, which I think is incredible. And then you have all of these different categories of things that could be helpful for people. So you mentioned your 4 core, and then you also have the different therapies and alternative modalities as well. And I would love if you could just speak about some of those and kind of what people might benefit from or be drawn to and what that looks like. So whether that's EMDR or the emotion code or some of these alternative things that people don't think about right away when they hear the word therapy.
Right. So thank you, Rachel. We look at everything through a lens of what is the most efficient way to heal. Now, when it comes to mental health, efficiency is often considered to be a 4-letter word. And I think that's ridiculous. I mean, I think it's ridiculous. And what other service do we look at and we say, well, who cares about efficiency? If we only live one life, and who knows, but this is only one I remember anyways, then I would like to not feel like crap as quickly as possible. And I do believe that when we explain away efficiency in this work, I think we're often giving ourselves a pass for doing poor quality work, or doing the kind of recommending services that are not actually a good fit for people. So our process at Hope Guide is that we start off with a really, really thorough assessment, and we're really looking at how is, you know, trauma, depression, anxiety, whatever it is, the symptoms that they're experiencing, how is that manifesting not just in their mind but in their bodies, and what are the tools that are most likely to help them find healing from that faster, and rather than with traditional therapy where you go in and you talk about, you know, talk therapy would be the most common form of therapy, and it's what most people pursue, where you go and talk about things and you try to shift your experience simply through your mind. We're saying, well, actually, why don't we just use as many tools as we have available, so that you don't have to spend 5 years in therapy to sort through this. Like, maybe you can actually have a few sessions and sort that out in connection with all of these other things that help you to change your experience. So we see it as starting first with nervous system work, which primarily we can actually do that stuff for free. I mean, there's a whole bunch of tools that can be helpful to make that faster. But what we're trying to look at is what is the most efficient, and then also what is the cheapest way to handle this? Is there ways that this can be done for free? So when we look, I'm getting to answering your question, Rachel. I'm sorry that I could be a little long-winded sometimes, but to get around to it, we've looked at all of the therapies that we offer and all the therapies in the market, that we know of. We don't know all of them, but all of the ones that are sort of most common. Say, what are the mechanisms of healing in that particular modality? So I'll give you an example. You mentioned EMDR.
Mm-hmm.
EMDR is really, really useful for what we would call discrete trauma. So that's usually like an individual incident that happened that you can remember. You remember what you felt like before, you remember what you felt like after, you've just been unable to process it. So a number of symptoms can happen, but often you're stuck in a loop, you get nightmares, that kind of stuff. EMDR is really, really helpful for that. Well, what did we do before we had EMDR, before it was developed by Francine Shapiro in the 1980s? What is the mechanism of healing that she was tapping into with that modality? Well, we believe, as best as we can tell, that it's the same thing as REM sleep. It's the same mechanism of healing, that our eyes move back and forth. This is what EMDR does. Our eyes are moving back and forth. Or it's in other forms of bilateral stimulation. And it's creating cross-hemispheric connections between our right brain, which is chaos and creativity, which is one way we handle the hard things in our life, as we use that as a strategy, and our left brain, which is order and structure. And it's creating an opportunity for those two sides of the brain to talk to each other in when we are experiencing emotional distress, and coming up with a solution, essentially. And so we're like, well, if that's true, can we have something of the same effect by improving somebody's sleep? Mm-hmm. Actually, we can, because when we sleep, we actually process a lot of those things that we can otherwise not process when we're not sleeping. Now, sometimes there's a catch-22 in there, because when you experience trauma, it's harder to sleep. So what are the other things that you can do to create those cross-hemispheric connections? Well, when we look at what we used to do back in the day, before we had all these fancy modalities, we used to go for a walk and talk with our friends. We were bringing up emotional experiences and having cross-hemispheric connection, which is right and left feet just walking. And it's a very, very, very gentle way of doing EMDR naturally. And so what we look at when we're putting together these healing plans for people, that's where we start. We start with an assessment, then we put together a healing plan. And then we identify, these are the modalities that would be useful for you, but then these are the analogs to these modalities. And the analog, that's a term that we use to just say, these are the other things that you can do that are similar to that can help you to access that same mechanism of healing that you already have within you, without having to pay for these fancy therapies. Mm-hmm. In a perfect world, and this is how we like to think of it, we know that the analogs can help us to get there, but probably slower than the therapy themselves. So the therapy itself is an accelerant to healing rather than the key to it. And that's how we try to orient all of our work, as opposed to saying, hey, you need to do this therapy in order to feel better. We try to say, hey, this is the mechanism of healing. Here are the different ways that you can access that. And these are the services that you can provide, some of which we provide, some of which we recommend, depending on what they are, that will help you get there faster. I know I didn't really answer your question about the specific modalities. We offer a lot and we recommend a lot. We've got about 45 to 50 that we're always looking at new ones and testing them out and seeing how effective are they and what do they do to help people. So that list is growing. But I wonder if that gives you a good idea to like our approach, and I'm happy to talk about any specific modality if you'd like.
That was awesome. I have actually never heard of the idea of walking and talking with friends and your legs going, if you're going at a steady pace, talking about this stuff. That is so cool. I think that's incredible that you help people figure out that path, no matter where they are at financially or where they're at in their lives. So I would love to talk.
Thank you, Rachel.
I would love to talk about all the therapies, but we don't have time to. I did want to hear a little bit more about key strategies for building resilience, because I know this is something you talk about. So if there's anything specific that you want the listeners to hear about that.
Yeah, so I view healing and resilience as two sides of the same coin. So a lot of the things that we do to heal from the hard things from the past are also the things that we do to build resilience for the future. I would say there's a couple of different ways to look at resilience. So since that's your question, we'll focus on that. But one of those categories is our physiology, when we're looking at our physiology, how do we help our bodies to be more resilient, so more adaptive to stress? So, the same things that we were talking about when it comes to like looking at the quality of the food that we're putting in. Even things as simple as like having probiotics. I mean, I don't want to sound dumb with you on the call here, because you're going to be like, oh my gosh, just probiotics. But even that can have a big impact in terms of our gut health, which helps serotonin, which helps us to be more resilient. There certainly are things like, for me, hot and cold therapy, quote unquote hot and cold therapy, which just means getting really hot and getting really cold. We can do that by having a cold shower. That's actually sufficient for a lot of people. That can help to build resilience. That was a huge thing for me for my nervous system. But there's also really simple tools. I really like, are you familiar with Heart Math?
Yes.
The Heart Math Institute? I love Heart Math. I did not think it should have any impact at all. And so it's basically meditation techniques, essentially, about that help to bring us into a state of coherence, which is aligning our emotions, our heart, and our minds. And I didn't think it would make much difference, but it's given me a lot of emotional resilience, and I noticed that within a couple of sessions, actually. So there's tools like that. There's also just like exercise helps us to give resilience. The thing that gives our body resilience also gives us emotional resilience, by the way, because it actually helps to give our nervous system more capacity. So that's physiological resilience, and there's a lot of things that we can do to help our bodies develop resilience, and that's really just the ability to handle stress. I actually like to think of it as two different. I like to think about our nervous system in two different ways. Number one, our nervous system is like a cup. And we have all these things that happen in our lives, all these different things that can contribute to pouring liquid into a cup. So you think if you have a cup, you put a little milk in there, a little orange juice, a little vodka, a little, wine, a little bit of, just if you're having a bad night, whatever. And then you put a little bit of, some water in at the end, and it spills over, and you say, well, what caused that nervous system to overload? Well, you might say it was the water because that was the last thing you put in there, but it's actually all of the things. It's all of those things that contributed. So we have two different strategies to being able to handle that. Number one, we can remove things from the cup. Say, okay, this thing that's creating these problems, I can take it out, and that can be changing our diet, that can be, improving our sleep, that kind of stuff. Or we can expand the size of the container. And so you have, so that even with all of those things inside of it, you still actually have the ability to handle them a bit more readily. And so you have things like, physical therapies like hot and cold therapy, which expand our capacity to be able to handle stress. That's what heat and cold is for us. It's stress. And so there's a lot of other things that we can do, but so when we talk about physiology, I like to think of it through those two different lenses. But then we look through what I call our mythology, and mythology is just the meaning we make of the things that happen to us, what it says about who we are, our value, and our future. And this is really where a lot of sort of traditional therapy comes in. It's helping us to rewrite the mythology of our lives. And very often when we experience suffering, it's because it's less about the thing that happened to us, and it's more about the meaning that we make about the thing that happened to us. So one of the ways to build resilience in our lives, and this therapy can actually be quite helpful for this, is looking at the hard things of our life and say, what am I saying that means about me? And can I write a different story? And so tools like, really simple, and I hate to be this boring, but tools like journaling can be really, really useful when we're coming at it from that question, saying, I am suffering because, in my experience, I experienced some childhood abuse, and I took that as meaning that I wasn't worthy of love. And so the childhood abuse is long since gone. I know it doesn't look like it, but I'm 43 years old now. And yet I've still suffered for that for years and years and years, because the meaning I made of that is that I wasn't worth loving. And I carried that story with me over and over and over again. And once I realized that and started to say, what is the meaning that I'm making of it? And what is the meaning I'd like to make of it? Once I started to do that, I could start to build a new level of resilience. And like I said, it's healing and resilience are two sides of the same coin. So it's kind of doing both, but it gives us a template for when we have new things happen in our lives. We can say, what is the meaning that I'm making of this thing? And how can I make a different meaning out of it? And so that's another, there's a lot of different tools, but that's one of them. And I love it. And it's really simple and it's free.
I love that so much. It reminded me of this little phrase of going from victim to survivor to thriver, right? Which is making a different meaning of your story. Do I want to be a victim to the fact that I went through childhood traumas, which many of us have? Or do I want to get to a point where I'm like, okay, I made it through that hard thing, and then to a point saying, I'm thriving now. I'm making a meaning. I'm taking that as power. I'm taking that as a part of who it made me and the positive, good things that came out of that experience and that story. And we all have that ability to rewrite that story in our minds and even how we share those stories about our past.
So true. And I would even go so far as to say, and I don't say this to trivialize anybody's experience. I've had my own experiences and I wouldn't want them trivialized, but so from my own experience, I had a pivotal moment, probably about 6 months ago, where somebody asked me if I could go back and change the really negative experiences that I had. Would I change them? And it was the first time, maybe it was about a year ago, but it was the first time I realized that the answer wasn't immediately, yes, I would change them. It was like, well, I don't know if I would change them, because I've started to believe that those of us who experience, and we all experience darkness and hard things, but those of us who've experienced particularly dark things, and we all do at some point in our lives, it gives us the opportunity to experience the light that much more clearly. And so it's like the beauty is in the contrast between those two things. It actually gives us the ability to experience the beauty of life so much better once we're able to work through it. So I think it's like you said, from victim to survivor to thriver. That's what thriving looks like. It's like, oh, there's actually beauty in this for me. It takes a while to get there.
It does. I know you have a dinner to run to, so we'll wrap up with our one final question that I like to ask everybody, which is, if you could leave the listeners with one tip that they can implement this week to help them live a healthier, happier life, what would that be?
I hate to repeat the old material that we've already talked about, Rachel, but I would say that I am absolutely convinced that the most powerful medicine is each other. It is. So I would say if there's one thing they could do this week, if they're experiencing something difficult, it would be to find somebody, sit down with them, and then start showing up for them without judgment, with curiosity, and focusing on, what am I seeing with my eyes? What am I hearing with my ears? And even more important, this takes practice, but what am I experiencing in my body when they speak? What am I noticing in myself? And then using that as a point for curiosity. And when we do that, we are training other people to do the same thing for us. And I don't think there's anything more powerful than that. I really don't.
That's beautiful. Go ahead and share where people can find you, whether that's the Hope Guide or how they can reach out to you, connect, and use your services as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Yes, they can reach out to the organization I run at hopeguide.com. We have contact details, and everything that we do is explained there. Or they can go to my website, where my podcast and my speaking, all that stuff is on there. And that's ryanpink.com.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like this video and comment, letting me know what you enjoyed and what you want to see more of. Also, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you get alerts when new content is coming out and you don't miss any videos. And just a quick reminder that this information is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any illness or medical condition. Please consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your diet, exercise routine, supplements, or medical treatment. If you're looking for a functional medicine practitioner, please reach out to me. And thank you again for watching, and keep striving to become your healthiest, happiest self.